The team's notification chimed at 7:23 a.m. on a Monday, which is the kind of detail you remember, because Monday mornings in Seattle in November are still dark, and I was on my second cup of coffee, watching the rain hit the kitchen window of the house I'd lived in for 19 years. My wife had passed 3 years before. The dog was getting old. I was 54 years old, and I had given 27 years of my life to Meridian Aerospace Systems, and the kid on my screen, the founder's son, had the gall to schedule a meeting called Roles and Realignment, without so much as a calendar invite the night before. His name was Brennan Vaughn, 29 years old, Harvard MBA class of 2024. He'd been at the company exactly 7 months, and his official title was Vice President of Operational Excellence, which is the kind of title you give someone when his father owns the building and you can't think of anything else to put on a business card. I joined the call. He was already there, smiling, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Morning," I said. "Morning," he said. And then, before I could even set my coffee down, "I'll keep this brief. The board's been doing a comprehensive review of legacy roles, and we've decided to consolidate the chief architect position into our newer engineering leadership structure. Today is your last day. HR will send paperwork by 10. I didn't say anything, not right away. I just looked at him through the camera. There was a poster behind him on his wall, one of those framed motivational things that says, "Be the disruptor," in big letters. I remember thinking how funny that was. How sad. He'd never disrupted anything in his life. He'd inherited a parking spot. "Brennan," I said, "does your father know about this?" "My father trusts me to make operational decisions," he said, like he'd rehearsed it. Maybe he had. "Look, I'm sure this is hard to hear. 20-some years is a long time, but the company's moving in a different direction. We need leaders who understand modern aviation, not just legacy mechanical systems." Legacy mechanical systems. He said that to a man who had designed the wing load distribution algorithm that was, at that very moment, keeping every single Meridian airframe in the sky. He said it to a man whose name was on patents the company had been licensing to Boeing and Lockheed for over a decade. He said it like he was reading it off a cue card. I took a sip of my coffee. I remember that very clearly. I took a slow sip, and I looked at him and I said, "All right, I appreciate the conversation." That's all I said. He blinked. I think he was expecting tears or shouting, or the kind of begging that men of my generation sometimes do when the floor falls out from under us. He probably watched some videos on how to handle difficult terminations. He had a whole script ready for the part where I broke down. Instead, I just said, "All right. Wesley will be the new lead architect," he added quickly. "Effective immediately. He'll be reaching out about transition." Wesley was 26. Brennan's college roommate. Wesley couldn't read a stress fatigue chart without a tutorial. "Sounds good," I said. "You'll receive a severance package," Brennan said. 2 months. Standard. After 27 years. Standard. "Thank you, Brennan," I said, and I meant the thank you. I really did, because in that moment, sitting in my kitchen with the rain coming down and my coffee going cold, I understood that this kid had just handed me something he didn't even know existed. He'd handed me the door I'd been holding closed for almost 6 years. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I walked over to the window, and I looked out at the rain. And for the first time in, I don't know how long, I smiled. Because what Brennan Vaughn didn't know, what nobody at Meridian knew, not even the old man, not even my own sister, was that on a Saturday morning in March of 2019, sitting at my own kitchen table on my own laptop, on my own time, I had filed a provisional patent application for the next generation wing actuator system, the one that became Meridian's entire commercial line, the one Boeing now wanted exclusive licensing on, the one that, according to a valuation report I had commissioned through a holding company in Delaware 18 months ago, was worth somewhere between $800 and $900 million, depending on how you counted the cross-licensing revenue. And the holding company that owned that patent, the one Boeing was negotiating with right now, The one that Meridian's entire next-generation product line depended on wasn't Meridian. It was a quiet little LLC registered in Wilmington called Trellis Aviation Holdings. And Trellis Aviation Holdings was me. I poured the rest of my coffee into the sink. I made a fresh cup. I sat down. And I started making phone calls. To understand how I got to that morning, you have to go back to 1998 when I walked into Meridian Aerospace as a 27-year-old engineer with one suitcase, an apartment lease in Renton, and a master's degree in aerospace structures from Purdue. The founder back then was Edmund Vaughn, Brennan's father. Edmund was 60 at the time, a Vietnam-era Air Force mechanic who'd built the company out of a hangar in Everett. He shook my hand the first day with a grip that crushed 3 of my knuckles and said, "Son, I don't care where you went to school. I care if you can think." I worked for that man for 20 years before his health started to slip. He was tough. He was difficult. He once made me redo a stress simulation 43 times because the safety margin was 0.02 off what he wanted. But he was fair. And when my wife was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2017, Edmund Vaughn called me into his office, closed the door, and told me to take whatever time I needed and that my salary would continue indefinitely. He didn't tell HR. He didn't put it in writing. He just did it. When my wife passed in 2021, Edmund came to the service. He sat in the back. He didn't say anything. He just stayed for the whole thing and then he drove home. That's the man Brennan Vaughn replaced. Edmund had a stroke in late 2023. Not a bad one, but bad enough that he stepped back from operations. He kept his title as chairman of the board, but he was at home most days now in his place on Mercer Island, and the kid, Brennan, had been gradually inserted into the running of things by a board that, frankly, had always wanted to push Edmund out. I had seen this coming, not the firing specifically, but the rot. I'd watched Brennan come in and start cutting the people who actually knew how things worked. I'd watched him replace pension contributions with stock options that nobody could actually exercise. I'd watched him slap operational excellence presentations together that were just rephrased versions of decisions made by McKinsey consultants who had never set foot inside a manufacturing bay. And I had watched, very carefully, as he made one specific mistake over and over again. He didn't read. Not contracts, not patents, not employee agreements, not the clauses my mother, and I'll get to her in a minute, had taught me to write into every single piece of paper that touched my work life. My mother, Adelaide, was a patent attorney. She worked for 41 years at a firm in Cleveland, where I grew up. She specialized in mechanical and aerospace IP. She used to come home from work, set her briefcase by the door, pour herself one bourbon over ice, never two, just the one. And she would tell me, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, the same thing every time. Document everything, she would say. Date everything. Own everything. She told me this when I got my first summer job. She told me this when I started college. She told me this when I signed my offer letter at Meridian. And she read that letter, by the way, before I signed it. She added 2 clauses to my employment agreement that Edmund Vaughn signed without blinking, because Edmund was the kind of man who respected a sharp lawyer when he saw one. Those clauses were specific. They said that any intellectual property I developed outside of company hours, on personal equipment, and outside the scope of my assigned project work would remain my sole property. And they said that any derivative work using that intellectual property by Meridian Aerospace would require written, explicit, and ongoing licensing approval from me personally, separate from my role as an employee. My mother died in 2014. She never got to see what I did with what she taught me, but she would have laughed. She really would have, because in March of 2019, on a Saturday, on my home computer, I sketched out the framework for what I'd been thinking about for years. A wing actuator system that used real-time load redistribution to extend airframe life by a factor of 3. I filed the provisional patent on a Sunday morning using a law firm in Bellevue that my mother had introduced me to years earlier. The provisional was time-stamped at 9:14 a.m. on March 17, 2019. I have the receipt. I have the email confirmation. I have the wire transfer record for my personal checking account. 6 months later, when the full patent was filed, Meridian's R&D division, under direction from Edmund, who was still running things then, began work on what they thought was a brand new internal project. They didn't know I had already patented it. They didn't ask. Nobody on the patent search team thought to check whether their own chief architect held private IP that overlapped with their roadmap, because why would they? I was loyal. I was their guy, 20-some years. But here's the thing my mother taught me that nobody else ever seems to learn. Loyalty is not a contract. Loyalty is a feeling, and feelings change. And when feelings change, all you have left is paper. I had paper. I had so much paper. I had Trellis Aviation Holdings, set up in Delaware in 2020, owned 100% by me, with my brother-in-law as the registered agent because he was a CPA in Portland who knew how to keep his mouth shut. I had a licensing agreement, drafted by the same firm in Bellevue, between Trellis and Meridian, that had been signed by Edmund Vaughn personally in 2020, in which Meridian agreed to license the wing actuator technology from Trellis for a 5-year term ending in February of 2026. Edmund signed it because the licensing fee was reasonable, $1.2 million a year, and because at the time neither of us thought the technology would scale the way it did. But it did scale. By 2024, that wing actuator system was the backbone of Meridian's entire commercial line. Boeing had come knocking. Lockheed had come knocking. The Defense Department had come knocking. And the licensing agreement between Meridian and Trellis was up for renewal in February of 2026, which was when Brennan fired me on that rainy Monday morning, exactly 14 weeks away. 14 weeks. Brennan didn't know about Trellis. He didn't know about the patent. He had never read my employment contract, never read the licensing agreement his father had signed, never asked why a small holding company in Delaware was receiving $1 million a year from his company. He had probably seen the line item on a P&L sheet and assumed it was a vendor he'd never heard of. There were thousands of those. Why would this one matter? So when I closed my laptop that morning and started making phone calls, the first call I made was to my attorney, Helen, who had been waiting for this call for almost 2 years. The second call I made was to the licensing department at Boeing, to a man named Carl, whose card I had been carrying in my wallet since a conference in San Diego 8 months earlier. The third call was to the Delaware Secretary of State's office to confirm a filing that was already in motion, a notice of non-renewal of the Meridian Trellis licensing agreement effective February 28, 2026. And the fourth call was the one I'd been waiting 27 years to make. Maybe not to make, just to be in a position to make. I called Edmund Vaughn at home. His wife answered. Margaret. I'd known her almost as long as I'd known him. It's me, I said. Is he up? He's up. He's having coffee. Hang on. A minute later, Edmund came on the line. His voice was slower now since the stroke, but still sharp. Still Edmund. Son, he said, why aren't you at work? Your boy fired me at 7:23 this morning. There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere in his kitchen. He what? Over Teams, 2 months severance. He's giving the role to Wesley. The breathing got heavier. I could hear him sit down. Edmund, I said, I need you to listen to me. I'm not calling because I want you to fix this. I'm calling because I owe you the courtesy of telling you what's about to happen before it happens, because of what you did for me when Eleanor was sick. Are you listening? I'm listening. You signed a licensing agreement with Trellis Aviation Holdings in 2020. That agreement covers the wing actuator system. It's up for renewal in February. I'm not renewing it. Another silence. Longer this time. Trellis is you, he said. Quietly. Not a question. Yes. I figured. I almost laughed. I should have known. You signed it knowing? I signed it knowing your mother taught you better than to leave money on the table, son. I assumed it was you. I never asked, because I didn't want to know for sure. Your work was worth more than what I was paying you. The licensing made up some of the difference. I called it fair. I didn't know what to say to that. Edmund, my boy is a fool, he said. I've been trying to tell his mother that for 30 years. She thinks Harvard fixed him. Harvard made it worse. He coughed. How bad is it? It's bad. Boeing's been wanting an exclusive direct license for 18 months. Without me renewing with Meridian, they're going to come straight to Trellis. Lockheed will follow. By the end of Q1, Meridian's commercial line has no underlying IP. How much? They've been paying me $1.2 a year. Boeing's opening offer was $48 million for a 5-year exclusive. Lockheed's matching. He was quiet for a long time. That's fair, he finally said. That's about what it's worth. Edmund, I want you to know, if your son had not fired me this morning, I was prepared to negotiate a renewal. Not at 1.2, but at a reasonable number. I was going to come to you directly. I wasn't going to do this. I believe you, son. But he did fire me, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen. No, Edmund said. Don't pretend. Don't ever pretend. There's one more thing. Tell me. There are 43 engineers on the airframe team who had nothing to do with this. Good people. Some of them have been there 15, 20 years. When this all comes apart, I don't want them to go down with it. I'm setting up a new operation, smaller, focused on the next generation actuator work. I'm going to hire as many of them as want to come. I wanted you to know that too. He breathed out slowly. I could hear something in his breath that I'd never heard from Edmund Vaughn in 27 years. I think it was relief. You take care of them, he said. You take care of my people. I will. My son, he said, is going to learn something today that he should have learned a long time ago. Yes, sir. You take care, son. You too, Edmund. I hung up. I sat there for a minute. Then I got up and made another pot of coffee because by now it was almost 9 a.m. and the day was just getting started. By Wednesday, the news had begun to move. Boeing's procurement office had formally opened negotiations with Trellis. Lockheed had requested a meeting for the following Tuesday. Helen, my attorney, had sent formal notice to Meridian's general counsel, a man named Philip, who I had played golf with twice and who was, I imagined, having the worst week of his professional life, that the licensing agreement would not be renewed and that any continued use of the wing actuator IP after February 28th would constitute infringement. By Thursday, Meridian stock was down 11%. By Friday, Brennan called me. I didn't pick up. He called again. Then again. Then he texted. The texts started professional and got less professional very quickly. The last one, sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night, just said, "Who the hell is Trellis Aviation Holdings?" I read it. I put my phone down. I didn't reply. The following Monday, exactly 1 week after he'd fired me, Brennan Vaughn sat in a conference room in Everett with his father, who had been driven in from Mercer Island for the occasion, and 3 of Meridian's outside counsel, and he was informed by his own father, who I am told did not raise his voice once, that the IP that Meridian's entire next-generation product line depended on was the personal property of the man he had fired over Microsoft Teams the previous Monday morning. I wasn't there. I heard about it later from Helen, who heard it from Philip, who was in the room. Apparently, Brennan said, "That's not possible. He works for us." Apparently, Edmund said, "He doesn't work for anybody, son. He never did. Your mother and I tried to tell you. You wouldn't listen." Apparently, there was a lot of yelling. Apparently, the outside counsel tried to suggest litigation. Apparently, Edmund stood up slowly with his cane and said, "We are not going to sue the man who built this company. We are going to apologize. And we are going to ask if there is any path forward, and we are going to accept whatever answer he gives us. Is that understood?" Apparently, nobody answered him. Apparently, he said it again, louder. And then they understood. Brennan was removed from his operational role the following day. Officially, he resigned to pursue other opportunities. The press release was a masterpiece of saying nothing. He moved to Austin 3 weeks later, where I'm told he is in some sort of crypto venture. I have not followed it closely. I met with Edmund one more time in early December at his house on Mercer Island. We sat in his kitchen. Margaret made us coffee and left us alone. The view from his back window goes out over the lake, and on a clear day you can see the mountains. "I'm not asking you to renew," he said. "I want to be clear about that. You don't owe us a renewal. You don't owe us anything." "I know. But I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly." "All right. If you were running this company, what would you do?" I thought about it for a long time. I watched the lake. I drank my coffee. "I would license the IP to Meridian non-exclusively," I said. "Not at 1.2. At $12 million a year, with annual escalators tied to revenue. I would do an exclusive carve-out with Boeing for the wide-body line at $40 million a year for 5 years. I would do a separate exclusive with Lockheed for defense applications at $28 million a year for 7 years. I would set up a new R&D operation focused on the next-generation work, and I would offer Meridian a right of first refusal on licensing that work in exchange for a minority equity stake in the new operation. I would hire 40 free engineers from your current airframe team with their existing tenure honored, and I would do all of this within 60 days. Edmund nodded. He didn't say anything for a long time. "That's what your mother would have done," he finally said. "My mother would have asked for more." He laughed. The first time I'd heard him laugh in years. "Probably," he said. "Probably she would have." We shook hands. His grip was weaker than it had been in 1998, but it was still firm. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and there was 27 years in that look. Good years. Hard years. Years I would not trade. "Your mother raised a good man," he said. "Your son will be all right, Edmund. Give him time. He'll need to learn what you learned, son." The hard way. The only way it sticks. I drove home through the rain. I let the dog out. I made dinner. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd filed that patent on a Saturday morning in 2019, and I thought about my mother. Document everything, date everything, own everything, own everything. She'd been gone almost 12 years. I missed her every day. But that night, I missed her in a different way. I missed her the way you miss someone when you want to tell them they were right. When you want to say, "Look, I listened. I did what you said. It worked. I poured a bourbon, just one, over ice, the way she always had. I drank it slow. I watched the rain. I thought about the 43 engineers I'd be calling in the morning, and the new operation we were going to build, and how this time every single contract was going to have language in it that my mother would have approved of. Because here is what I've learned in 54 years on this earth. People will try to take what you've built. Sometimes they'll do it out of malice. Sometimes they'll do it out of stupidity. Sometimes they'll do it because they were told they could by parents who loved them too much to teach them better. It doesn't matter why. The result is the same. The only thing that protects you is paper. And the only thing that gives you paper is somebody, somewhere along the way, sitting you down and telling you to document everything, date everything, own everything. I had that person. Her name was Adelaide. She was my mother. She was a patent attorney from Cleveland. She poured one bourbon a night, and she taught her son how to read a contract before he signed it, and how to build something on his own time that was his and his alone, and how to wait, quietly, patiently, for as long as it took, until the people who didn't understand what they had reminded him, in the most direct way possible, that he wasn't going to be working for them forever. Brennan Vaughn thought he was firing an old man on a Monday morning. He wasn't. He was reminding me of every single thing my mother ever taught me, and he was handing me, in the most generous gesture of his short and undistinguished career, the only thing I'd ever needed to be free of him and his company and his entire diminished idea of what loyalty was worth. I closed the laptop, I said, "All right," and then I built something better. I think about that Monday morning more than I should. Not because I missed the job. I don't. I think about it because of the silence after I closed the laptop, the rain on the window, the cold coffee, the way my hand was steady when I picked up the phone to call my attorney, and the way it had been steady the morning I filed that patent 6 years earlier on a Saturday at my own kitchen table. The steadiness wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was the long, quiet work of being prepared. Brennan Vaughan didn't fail because he was a bad person. I want to be honest about that. He failed because nobody ever sat him down and made him read a contract before he signed it. Nobody made him do a stress simulation 43 times until he got it right. His father gave him a parking spot and a title, and his mother gave him the belief that the world owed him soft landings, and between them, they raised a boy who thought loyalty was something you collected from other people instead of something you built inside yourself. The cause was carelessness. The effect was a company in pieces. That is how it works. That is always how it works. Everything I had on that Monday morning I had because my mother Adelaide sat me at a kitchen table when I was 13 years old and told me to document everything, date everything, own everything, own everything. She didn't tell me that to make me suspicious. She told me that because she had seen in 41 years of practice what happens to people who trust without paper. The wisdom she gave me was not cleverness. It was discipline dressed up in 3 short sentences, and I carried it for 40 years before I needed it. The character part of it, the part that matters most, was not the patent. It was the phone call to Edmund. I owed that man a phone call before I ruined his son's life, and I made it. Because a person who builds a quiet revenge and forgets the human being on the other side of it is not better than the people who fired him. He is just smarter at being the same kind of small. I called Edmund because I wanted to look in the mirror the next morning. And the strength of it, the nerve to wait 6 years without telling anyone, without bragging, without using it as leverage when I was passed over for the VP slot in 2022, that came from somewhere deeper than wisdom or ethics. That came from believing my own work was worth something, even when nobody else was paying attention. That came from 43 rejected stress simulations under Edmund Vaughan in 1999, and a mother who poured 1 bourbon a night and never 2. If you take anything from my story, take this. Build quietly. Document everything. Treat the people who deserve your honor with honor, even when you are dismantling the thing they built. And keep your hand steady. The morning will come when you need it.